some quick slides with you all. Let's close that, and I'm going to share some slides here about some of KQED's research. It has been quite a month for us here at KQED, as I suspect it probably has been for all of you. So thank you so much for making a little bit of time to be here this afternoon or morning in some cases. So my name is Ernesto Aguilar. I am the Director of Programming for Radio here at KQED in San Francisco. And I was asked to speak a bit about our Latinx research and some of the work that was involved to get to this point for KQED. I will say that, yes, it's true, we are a very large organization, but it's also very much like moving an oil tanker. So if we were able to get some of these things accomplished, I hope that it might inspire and empower you to feel that you can get this work done as well, no matter the size of your organization. For us, this work began in 2020 around a series of conversations that we began to have about our leadership and organization and where our greatest opportunities would arise for KQED. First and foremost, that was rolled out in the form of what was a DEI report, which you can see the link for there at the bottom if you'd like to look at it. Here are a few charts from that. This is public information that we have shared out to the wider public media system. And what KQED decided to do is we understood that diversity, equity, and inclusion is an important conversation for all of our organizations in public media. And so we decided to take a deeper look at ourselves first and foremost. What could we be doing internally to better represent our communities? What could we be doing better in terms of content to represent our communities and present the voices that were in the Bay Area? That being not just San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland, but Fremont, Daly City, Sacramento, San Jose, some of the other communities that KQED also has very large audiences. And how can we present their perspectives in a richer, more contextual, more relevant way? So we took a deep look at our internal culture and also our staffing. So you see here some of the diagrams that are from our website that include how are we staffed and how does that square up with our audience and how does it square up with the Bay Area writ large? We also took a larger look at both staffing, part-time and full-time staffing, but also leadership. And where does that square up in relationship to the Bay Area and then our audience? And then where does that fit in terms of our sense of belonging for our staff? And how can we deepen that relationship? We saw that the need to grow our Latino leadership and staffing is a big priority for KQED. And also, what can we be doing, or we began to think a little bit deeply, but how can we be looking deeply at our content? So with that in mind, we engaged in a source diversity conversation. Wasn't a complex thing, as you can see. We had a Google form that we used, so not a big, very expensive reach, but we began to start to collect data about how we were, the diversity of our sources for our news stories. We do an extensive amount of news. We have probably around 50 newscasts, 20 newscasts every day. A little bit less on the weekends. You're probably looking at about 8 to 12 newscasts each day on the weekends. So we collect a lot of news. We do a lot of production, both on digital and on broadcast, and we have a lot of data, consequently, that we end up collecting. And then with the chart above, you can see that we begin to also track what our sources were looking like. We also did a source diversity conversation where the sources tended to be coming from and much, much more. And with this data in mind, we put together what you see below, which is a newsroom North Star, and wanting to be more representative and more contextual of our communities. I'll be sharing these slides with America Amplified, so you don't have to write all of this down. Going to be getting to some data as well a little bit later, and you'll be able to reflect back on those as you go. With all of this information, taking our news diversity and how we were sourcing our news stories, and then our staffing, how our leadership and staff, part-time and full-time and on-call, represented the Bay Area, we dived into an audience research project. The chart that you're seeing to the right is basically what a lot of the audience said they were most interested in. These were the 5 categories that audiences said they were very, very interested in. I'll get into some more of these findings a bit. You'll see a much more detailed chart in just a little bit. So our study was a qualitative and quantitative study with a range of audiences. The P1s, the folks that listen to KQED and watch KQED all the time. They love us. They go to us whenever they are interested in finding out news or history or entertainment. They come to us quite a bit. KQED is very unusual in terms of what public media is in terms of its normal expectation in its city. We are the most listened to broadcast outlet in the Bay Area, commercial, non-commercial. We are also one that enjoys a very large membership, and we also have a large listenership in Sacramento and many of the surrounding areas. So it's pretty unusual. However, we do also have a lot of people who are not familiar with us. So we also polled within our survey results that we did people who were not as familiar with what we did. So we thought that that was very helpful to inform our overall understanding of the Latino communities here in the Bay Area. We did Zoom interviews, we did surveys, and we did one-on-one interviews with all of these audiences, multi-generational as well, and those with families and those without, to take in what their experiences were in listening to KQED, and also what those who weren't necessarily interacting with KQED were looking for. Our research goals were pretty simple. We wanted to understand what those audiences were, and we also wanted to understand our opportunities for KQED. So in understanding the audiences, we really wanted to understand the media consumption habits. What were they looking for, and where were they looking for it? Were they looking for it on radio, television, social media, in print? Where were those audiences looking for this information that they might be looking for? What kinds of content were they searching out? Also, what were the differences between the generations and the levels of KQED awareness in terms of that consumption and those content preferences? We were also looking at languages spoken at home and in the media that they were consuming, and then also their attitudes around public media. And then finally, we were really curious about what kinds of questions, problems, and issues the audience was turning to media for, and how we as KQED might be able to answer those things for the audience. The biggest opportunities that we were seeking out were things like people who were looking for something and couldn't find it elsewhere. They were searching for something deeper. So how could we realize that opportunity with that particular audience? Also, we were looking to figure out what the opportunities were based on the interests of English-dominant audiences and Spanish-dominant audiences. And then short-term and long-term solutions for those audiences. A short-term answer might be, I'm looking for information about COVID vaccines. A long-term issue might be, I have a family and I would like to convey home to my kids, and I want to keep that connection going. So that's going to be a long-term relationship. And then finally, what are the opportunities related to content, platform, tone, and voice for KQED? And that's a very, very long, complicated conversation. Maybe we'll get into that into Q&A, but those are, in brief, some of the opportunities we began to look at. What did we find? This is a lot of information, so I'm going to try to breeze through this fairly quickly. I won't get into all of the text, but try to give you some of the anecdotes, and I'm happy to share with you offline or in Q&A a little bit more about this conversation. I know that we in public media sometimes think that we are very, very specific snowflakes, but we oftentimes find that these snowflakes have a relationship that in the fact that we're all snowflakes, we're all special in some ways, but we all have a lot of very common kinds of characteristics. So I hope that when in sharing these kinds of things, that these findings are not isolated to the Bay Area, because I think that for those of you who have began to engage your communities, you may hear and see a lot of themes here that you've experienced in your areas. And what we found in the Bay Area is that many of the communities that we talk to have deeper relationships with their familial countries, and not just necessarily a collective Latinx identity. There are diverse communities and experiences, and it's important as an opportunity, we found, that acknowledging those creates a bond of trust. Also, we found that our Latino communities here were looking for content that was relatable, but was above and beyond what they were finding. Things like traditions, things like human connections. They want content that educates, and also content that's intellectually stimulating, educational, and inspiring in a way that includes their respective identities. We found that audiences turn to news that helps them plan for their lives, but also gives perspective to their countries of origin and makes that visible to the wider community. This is a really interesting distinction, because we talked to many different communities that said, I want to know about home, but more importantly, or almost as importantly, I want to educate the wider community that my home is not what people see in larger media outlets. It is not a terrible place. It's not a place of corruption. It's beautiful. There is a deep history there that the non-Latino community doesn't always get to see. So when you talk about my home to these communities, you're educating them too and helping them get a better sense of that place. Language is key to preserving identity as well. We found, and this has been bared out by Pew Research and many others, that language ends up morphing as assimilation happens. So preserving Spanish is important to keeping those ties with previous generations for young people. We have found in some of that research that there are a lot of subtle differences between those who are the P1s, the regular consumers, and those who consume less, and also with those who have families and those who do not. And it's also important to begin to mind the gaps between those who are 35 and younger and those who are not. This is going to be very critical when looking at Latino communities, because the average age of Latinos in the United States right now is 34. So you'll want to begin to really think about how your station or your organization interacts with Latinos who are under 34 and how you're relevant to them. And then also, again, going back to our research, asking what they're interested in. You may be surprised in what you find. You'll see here, this is a table from one of our charts, and what audiences said in the darkest colors here are what they found most interest in. And some things we in public media don't always cover, but it's something that might be of interest to you, might be an opportunity for you to create a new conversation, to begin listening to these communities in a new way that you might not have otherwise done. And my final 2 minutes, I just want to share some of how we have applied some of the work that we are doing here. First and foremost, we've been doing a number of in-person events. The top picture that you see is Victor Aguilera, who did an in-person event with us. He talked about his roots from Venezuela and how he, as a chef, has created restaurants from basically a cart, going around the community, sharing Venezuelan food, and how he has taken that to sharing his heritage and his culture. Donde Está Mi Gente has been a showcase that we have broadcast and also done in person here and also streamed online. KQED has a YouTube page where we stream all of our in-person events for those who may not be comfortable coming out in person. We have a KQED in Espanol Instagram account where we answer the community's questions around a wide variety of issues. And finally, we launched in December Bay Area Ofrendas, which brings the different communities together to recognize inspirations in their lives and what those individuals who have oftentimes passed meant to the speakers in question. You can see the first round of these at kqed.org/ofrendas to see photos and also hear in English and Spanish some of the ofrendas that were shared. These are now on digital, but we did broadcast these as well for Las Posadas in December. And with that, I am out of time and want to say thank you. And you can reach me here in the chat, and there's my email address and also on social media. There's a perception sometimes that KQED is very big and we don't have time, but we do have time. I have time for all of you because I'm grateful to Maritza, Paola, and America Amplified. I see Alisa's here, and I want to say thank you all for being here.
Hey, Matt, can we ask quick questions or should we wait till the end?
We can wait till the end for that, if that's okay with you.
Yep. Ernesto, I'm going to shoot you a question in chat.
All right, thank you for that, Ernesto. And we're going to switch over and give it to Paula now.
Hola a todos. Good afternoon. So great to be here among like-minded people. Muchas gracias for coming today. I think, a lot of us, Maritza, Ernesto, and I are going to echo each other on the tools that we're using to reach the Spanish-speaking community, but we're doing it all in various ways. So I think that that's something that I hope you guys take away from today's presentation, is how we're all maybe doing similar things to reach the Spanish-speaking population, but doing it in different ways. So I'll go ahead and share my screen with you guys. Can you guys see that? Yeah, okay, perfect. So I'm going to talk about Que Pasa Midwest and what we did before we started officially producing the content that we do now. And, we did a lot of the processes that we talked to you guys about in America Amplified, source diversity tracking, talking to our communities. We did attended a lot of events, talked to a lot of people officially and unofficially. So I'm just gonna share a little bit of that process with you guys, hoping that it inspires something or maybe gives you an idea for engaging your community. So I'll go ahead and, yep, there you go. Okay, so what we did beforehand. So a little bit about Que Pasa Midwest. Que Pasa Midwest was born from the need for more stories about Latinos living in the Midwest. We are a bilingual podcast, and we have episodes that are from 8 to 15 minutes long. We cover topics ranging from immigration, COVID, politics, social injustice, music, culture, but we always do it from a human-centered perspective. And we always make sure that we're telling the story of a person, but of like Margarita or Pedro, but we're doing it about this broad topic that it's affecting a lot of people in the community. So before we started doing all of this, one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to establish why this was important to us and the organization. We wanted to make sure that us and our team knew we were, in the same page on why this was happening, why we were building this, why we were working on this project. And I think for us, it was really important to have this cohesive idea of what we were all working on for better presentation and also for just better results for the project. We also understood by trial and error at the very beginning that there had to be a lot of assessment of our community before creating any content. So we had to learn about what the community needed instead of creating content that we thought they needed. So after assessing, the Latino community here in the Midwest, we could quickly realize that they were interested in getting more relatable stories that cover timely events as opposed to feel good evergreen stories, which we were doing at the very beginning before we did the assessment. And this is where the trial and error that I'm talking about comes in. So, after that, we realized that and we pivot, and I'll get a little bit more into that after that. But, I think after the assessment, I'm sure you guys are familiar with, the process of setting realistic goals. So that's something that we did based on what we heard from the community. These are the type of content that they're consuming, and this is the direction that we're taking. So we thought that our processes and our production schedule and our team tasks also had to mimic what we were doing with our content, and being very aware of that, just for better, I guess at the end, for having better content for the podcast. I think something that we came up a lot is that we are a bilingual podcast. We do not translate. So we do English to Spanish, Spanglish to English, nos movemos en dos lenguas, and we do not translate. So, this Spanglish narrative, we discover that flow between both languages was appreciated by not English only, but also Spanish only speakers. And we wanted to challenge our audience by doing that, but we also wanted them to be able to relate to us. And that was really important to us. Our main audience is the millennials, which are millennials who are bilingual. So one of the things that we wanted to do is that we wanted our audience to be able to relate to us. And that's how they speak at home. They go back in English, en español. Así que queríamos tener esa dinámica con ellos. Something that we also did was, in that same boat, we wanted to challenge our newsroom. But by challenging them is by bringing something new into the organization, but in the same aspect, also bringing everyone on board to create that strong support system within the organization. So always keep your organization posted on what you're doing so they can help bring in donors and listeners. And we did that especially with our development and grants department. And then, brace for impact and pivot. I think that's something that we did often. Like I said, the language conversation came up. So I think that being able to come into the project knowing that, there was no blueprint and there was going to be a lot of trial and error really helped us prepare for what we had coming ahead. So here are some key points that we learned from our audience, the millennials. So we learned from the millennials here in the Midwest who listen to Que Pasa Midwest is that they are interested in news, story about specific cultures like Mexican pulque, known in Mexico as the drink of the gods, or stories about, like, for example, a Caribbean identity, which is the story that we did about the West Indies and about reggae and religion. And then a lot of that had to do with, like, that feeling of creating that community in the Midwest of Latinos, in that topic of identity, of how we identify ourselves. And that's something that comes up in the Latino community a lot. So we realized that they were interested in stories that they not only can relate to in the language, but they can relate to culturally as well. And that's something that Ernesto was talking about earlier. We also learned that they were reachable through Facebook was our main platform. So, doing that assessment really kind of gave us an idea of where they were getting their information from, where they prefer to listen. We went with a podcast that was 8 to 15 minutes long because we understood, that there was a lot going on. So whenever we assess our community, we realized that quick episodes and having audio on demand worked best for the audience that we were trying to reach. And don't be scared by all this list that I made. I will share this document and the presentation with you after the conversation is over. But see, here are some things that we produce aside from our stories that came from that assessment that we did that was really fruitful for community engagement. We created bilingual playlists on Spotify. And I can share you some of this stuff. We animated stories. We had a bilingual newsletter. We had a lot of conversations with the community. We wanted to have a space for them to not only listen to the episodes and to the podcast, but to be able to share those episodes with their friends, their family, their community. So we created this space on our website where they can host their own QPM listening party. And we, giving them the space to be part of the podcast in a way, really resonated with our connection with them and how we build that trust between us and them. And here are a couple more pictures of us with community engagement and doing presentations. So then just in the couple of minutes that we got left, some things that we did, and also one of the other things that we did after we did the assessment for our community that we thought was great was we created this one sheet. And this is what I'm showing you guys right now. And I know we call it one sheet. It's not just one sheet. It's about 3 or 4. But, we think it's so valuable, not only for us to be able to tell our community who we are, but also to attract supporters and people to feel like they're part of what we're doing, because they are. We are assessing them at the beginning and we're creating the content. And at the end, we should tell them about, these are the results of what we've been working on. This is why it works. And this is why we should be creating more of that. So this is just the one sheet that we created. And I wanted to share with you guys. Like I said, I'll send this to you. I'm sure some of you have some for your stations, but if you are starting a new program or working on this project, which is very community engagement center, I think that this will be an effort that will really pay off at the end. And then at the end of our one sheet, we do have a bragging one sheet where we tell our community, thank you for supporting us. And this is some of the awards that we've got from the content that we've been producing. So I think that, after doing that assessment, creating all this content, and be able to continue to create more from the content has really showed us with Que Pasa Midwest that we've been able to rely on, assessing the community and engaging with them through the tools that we talked to you about in America Amplify, being able to relate to them in a cultural way, talk about the language. So with all of that, I think now Que Pasa Midwest has, it's kind of proved that it works. We've kind of pivoted. Now we're going to be shifting from being just a podcast to a distributing bilingual reporting network, and we will develop this media network that will include culturally competent news and feature stories, and they will be distributed for free to media outlets nationwide. So, we decided to pivot once again based on the assessment that we recently did. And then, with all of that, I also wanted to mention that we received a grant of $125,000 from New Media Ventures. So that's another way to measure our success with community engagement. It's not only being able to look at our audience and connect with them and relate to them, but also looking back and saying, hey, this is all we've done. This is the awards that we have. And now moving on, let's create this and continue to share it and make it bigger. So just a little bit about our process. I'll be sending this to you guys, and hopefully it inspires you and gives you some ideas of maybe new content to create for your own stations and your own shows. And I just wanted to say thank you Gracias a todos for giving me some of your time, and I'll be happy to answer your questions later on. So thank you. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Paola. And again, yeah, if you want to put your questions in the chat, I will make sure to go back to those after we finish talking with Maritza, who I'll kick it over to now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hola, hola, ¿cómo están? Maritza Felix, Mexican immigrant living in the US, living the dream in Arizona. I started Conecta Arizona during the pandemic, 2020, inspired on my mom, because she was, well, when the border closure, my mom stayed on the Mexican side of the border and I stay on the US side of the border. And we use WhatsApp to communicate. So she was sending this good morning with glitter and flowers every single morning. And then she was starting sending me all these memes and misinformation about the pandemic. And she was saying, oh, Arizona is too hot. Whenever it's going to be summer, the coronavirus is going to go away. And it was like, no, mom, that's not how it works. So let me explain it to you. But then my mom wasn't the only one. My friends, my high school colleagues, my friends from Mexico, my colleagues from here, from the US, a lot of people that I know from Facebook are asking me the same question. It's like, I'm going to create a WhatsApp group that actually respond to all these questions that the people are asking me, so I don't have to be doing it one by one. So that's how Conecta Arizona started. And then I do have a presentation as well. Hold on, let me try to share my screen. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to, because I just got hacked again this weekend. And I don't think I can, but well, okay, I'll email that to you. I had to put my security preference up again. So this is who we are. We are a WhatsApp group that actually identified the huge gap that it was between Spanish-speaking coverage and English-speaking coverage about the pandemic and so many other issues in Arizona. And Arizona is kind of little Mexico. So it was like, how come we don't have any access to any resources in Spanish? So we created a WhatsApp group that it grew at the beginning just with my friends and my husband and my mom. And then it grew organically to 257. That is the max in WhatsApp group. So we now had to start some broadcast list. And then we grew to a radio show. Now we have a newsletter and we have a podcast coming out. So everything has happened in less than 2 years, and it's all community-based support and inspired, because that's something that we're doing. Everything that we do though is in Spanish. So, but we're working on the stories of the community as well. And we are like getting them in English in different media outlets. We have a lot of strengths. For example, the network that we have with our communities, the experts that actually help us to provide that reliable information to the community. We have partnerships and memorandums of understanding of collaborations with different media outlets in the US and in Mexico. So we're media partners with Prensa Arizona, La Estrella de Tucson, La Onda 1190, as well as Uniradio, El Sol de Mexico, and different media outlets across the border. We have a lot of opportunities to grow, but what we're trying to do is stay and develop the products that we already have, and trying to listen to the community so we can start creating on their needs and not what we assume that they need. So something that we learned with Conecta Arizona is that we actually need to stop providing for a while and start listening. And that's something that is really, really important, because as journalists, we're always so used to be putting out there the breaking news, the digital, the weather, what's going on and everything. But sometimes we need to stop. And it's like, well, I'm here. What do you need? And start listening. And listening, sometimes it can be a very painful and slow process, but I promise that it's worth it. And then we need to start listening to the awkward silences as well from our communities, because they tell us so much and we hardly take the time to actually put attention on that and creating a community around silences, not just words or stories. Another thing that we learn through our community engagement is that we need to stop extracting stories from the community. So usually what our reporters done, at least here in Spanish, is like, they want to work on a story and they go to their Facebook and they put like, who knows the person that doesn't want to get vaccinated? No, if you invest in your community, you don't need to be asking that question on Facebook. You know exactly which family doesn't want to get vaccinated and why. So then that's the inspiration, so you can start working on the story. So you can stop relying on Facebook, because we all have different life in Facebook, and actually start working on real life. But for that, so again, stop, listen, and leave the community that you're serving. I think when we don't make the time to live in the community that we're serving, we're actually not doing an investment in the community. We're like just spending the resources without knowing where we're going, how we want to go, and where and who is coming with us. And one of the questions on the chat that I think that is really important is, yes, of course, we need people who looks like our community to serve them. The other day, I'm part of so many cohorts this year that is like, it is crazy. But one of them, we got a guest speaker that she was working on a groundbreaking idea for serving Latino community in a very white neighborhood. And after 100 interviews, she realized that she needed a Latino reporter. It's like, really? After 100 interviews, that is a waste of resources. I could have told you that since day one. And obviously she only has a Latino on the reporter side of it, but she doesn't have a Latino on the editorial board. She doesn't have a Latino on the management position. So she doesn't have a Latino where the decisions are being made. So that's really frustrating, because if you want to serve the community, you need not just look like them, but understand like how they live, how they're growing up, what they want, how they see themselves, because sometimes the way that they see themselves is completely different as how we see them in media. I'm so sorry I cannot share this presentation with you, but yeah. And how do we do that? So we need to ask ourselves questions. What community do you want to serve? For example, here in Arizona, Spanish speaking, obviously, but what community? For example, the majority of Spanish-speaking Arizonans are Mexicans. So we're serving basically the Mexican community across the border in the United States, in Mexico, where Maricopa County, Pima County, Santa Cruz County, and Hermosillo. I cannot cover the whole state because that's not realistic, even though we want to do it. If we want to do hyperlocal journalists, we need to like focus on the communities that we want to. Why? Because obviously there was a lack of information for them. Everything was translated and it was a bad translation. It was a cheap translation from the government. And then it was like so frustrated. I couldn't even read it to it because it was so bad. But we need to do it. And then we need to start asking, what are their needs? The real ones, not the ones that we assume. For example, in Conecta Arizona, we have La Hora del Cafecito, that is the coffee break. And we sit down every single day, from 2 to 3 with a coffee mugs. I even have my coffee mugs. And I chat with the Conecta Arizona team members. There are days that I don't want to connect. There are days that I just had like a very crazy day and my mind is so like focused on doing something. I need to stop and go to the cafecitos. There are days that I don't know who I'm going to invite because like my head is so tired and because my kids are like homeschooling or because the internet is not working, but I still showed up. So that's really important, showing up. So during that hour, I asked them, it's like, what do you need? Who do you need to connect with? What kind of experts are you looking for? Whose phone number do you want, basically? Because I can invite immigration attorneys, the liaison from the Sonora government in Arizona, even a U.S. ambassador was part of the Cafecito once. The U.S. ambassador gave us his personal phone number. He was part of the group and he was okay with it. And suddenly they told me, Maritza, stop bringing them. We want to know a little bit more about essential oils. And I never thought about essential oils like something that I wanted to spend the time in during the cafecito doing it. But that's what they want. And then we move to other topics. So when you identify the real needs and you need to start thinking, well, I'm not the only one asking these questions. Who's reaching my community today and how they're doing it? Are they doing it in Spanish, in English, through TV? Are they using social media platforms? Are they in TikTok, for example? That's something that I'm learning because I don't know, and my community is using a lot of TikTok. And then what resources do I need? Do I need to take all resources from my newsroom, or can I collaborate with another newsroom to make it happen? That's what we're doing with Prensa Arizona. That's what we're doing with the radio station. That's what we're doing with our Mexican colleagues. Who can be your partner? Identify them. And then just write down the result that you're hoping for. Because sometimes it's like, I'm gonna do everything. And then you never stop to think, what do you actually want from this? What do you want from this collaboration? What do you want from this cafecito that you're having with someone? What do you want from the community that you're serving? And we have learned during this year and a half, almost 2 years, that community journalism takes a lot of time, that you need to be available to the community that you're serving, that you actually need to invest in people to do the job, not just the reporter in the newsroom, but the same community that you're serving, that you need to ask more questions and assume so much less, that you need to create a path, because you're not the only one who's going to be doing this work forever. Somebody else is going to be coming after you, or is going to be creating his own path just next to you. So create a path that can actually be a way for others to do so, and learn that we are changing. The community is no longer is like, come and meet us here in the newscast from 5 to 4:30 or whatever that your time is. Like, no, it's like, wait, where are you? I'm coming to you. Where are you getting your news? I'm gonna be there. I don't want you to make the extra effort, because I know that you have already so many things in your plate that we're gonna make it easy for you. So that's what we have learned. I know that it's really difficult to do it, but I think dialogue and conversations, typical conversations, are the ones that need to guide the new kind of journalists that we want to do, either solutions, either communities, in-depth journalism, whatever we do. And we need to stop assuming what the community needs from our own identity, from our own perspective, from our own privilege. I think we need to serve from need and not from privilege. And obviously, since we're using not traditional platforms, how we measure success is extremely difficult. And I think in Conecta Arizona, we're like the Leonardo DiCaprios from the Oscars, because we have been nominated for so many things that we never get anything, but everybody is like, woohoo, Conecta Arizona is doing a great job. And we're actually looking and hearing testimonies from the communities like, Maritza, thanks to you, I got my kids vaccinated. Maritza, thanks to the expert that you invited, now I have my passport. Maritza, thanks to what the Conecta Arizona radio show person was there, I knew when I crossed the border that I needed to have these documentations. So that's actually our Oscars in real life, the testimonies from the people. And yes, we are really, really proud that we're doing something that is collaborative, bilingual, and transborder, and that our magic is actually in the people. And as I say, we like to do periodismo con acento y con talento.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maritza. And it looks like we have a question that just came in for you from Rima, and she wanted to know, what did you do around combating misinformation on the pandemic for your community in Arizona, and what their, excuse me, was there a turning point that they trusted you as a news source instead of other sources for news?
Yes, I think 99% of the job that I'm doing, besides connecting people to experts, is just combat misinformation around everything, around COVID, around those home remedies that we have in the Latino communities, is like, I don't know, hot water with lemon and baking soda, till the border reopening, and how many TikToks about immigration attorneys saying that the border is going to close again, that they're going to ask whatever things to cross the border, going back and forward, everything. What I did, for example, I work really close with factcheck.org, and then I'm doing a lot of fact checking as I do as a regular, because Conecta Arizona is my project, is my baby, but I still do a lot of freelance work for myself because I'm an independent journalist, and I actually have worked with American Amplify before. So that's really nice on elections and politics. And I do a lot of fact check. One of my projects with Conecta Arizona, and that we're hoping to get funding somewhere, soon, is to have our community, Cazadores del Mito, Mythbusters, is I want to train my community to identify that information and to help me, for me not to be the only one, be like double checking everything. But right now what I'm doing is like, send me everything. Don't be ashamed of what it is. You can send me a TikTok video, a link to a YouTube channel. You can send me a screenshot of whatever, or that thing that they send you WhatsApp, and I'll tell you what is right and what is not. But obviously when it's easy, it's like I respond right away. And when it's not, for example, when they send me things about Mexico as well, because we do fact checking about Mexico, it's like, it's not so easy to get information in Mexico. So it's going to take me a little bit longer, but I always get back to the people. And if I don't know the answer, I connect that person to another expert who can actually help us. And at the end, when they both resolve the issue, whatever it was, we have a cafecito around it. For example, we have cafecitos about abortion, about that CEO from Pfizer who said the vaccines weren't useful, but he was never actually an employee of Pfizer and whatever. So we have had that. We have this Kennedy Jr. Information that is being like around in TikTok and WhatsApp. So I invite experts that come and say, this is not true because of this. If I cannot find a fact checker, I'll invite a doctor, I'll invite a policymaker or something to join us and to explain how everything works and how this cannot be actually possible. But, and I think saying, I don't know this, let me get to the answer, or I don't know, let me ask the experts. That's the thing that has helped us to build this credibility with the community, because they're not expecting us to know everything. They know we're just human and we're just going through the same as they are going through during this pandemic. So being realistic with them and being truthful with them, it is so important. But yes, we need to be fighting misinformation all day long.
Great. And does anyone else have any questions that they would like answered or like to ask?
Just a follow-up question, Maritza, on what you've just shared, but to expand it for Paola as well as Ernesto. Have you found differences in whether it's the boomer generations in the communities you're serving that are more likely to believe in fake news or misinformation, or Paola, have you found that amongst your bilennials as well?
We have not actually. I think that one of the things is, being younger, maybe having more access to different types of media, and not just following one, maybe Telemundo or, El Canal 4 or something like that. So I think that, at least with our community and whenever we talk to millennials, they do often have a more kind of more open mind, and they move around medias a lot more, and they fact check and they make sure, because nowadays, whenever something comes up, it either goes viral or, there's a lot of things going on in social media as well. And being so involved in that, I think helps also kind of fact check their information. So at least we haven't had that experience. I do want to clarify that even though we serve, our main target is millennials, whenever we did our season about COVID, the majority of our listeners and some of our sources who we talked to were the older population of the Latino community in the Midwest. So they were really involved in that subject as well. So I think that whenever we did talk about misinformation, in that sense, our target audience was the older Latino or Spanish speaking generation. So.
Thanks. I would just add, and something that Maritza said a little bit earlier brought this up for me. I think what we found is that it also, the misinformation and the ages that are impacted tends to be based on what one's a reference group is, the people in your community and who you trust and who you're talking to most often. Even if you're a little bit younger, if you're getting this from somebody who's older that you trust, or similarly, if you're a young person and you're sharing it with parents or grandparents, they may believe a little bit more because of the relationships. So it doesn't, at least here, and I'm sure probably in some other areas too, it doesn't necessarily know so much of a generation. It really is about how close knit the community is.
Great. And does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask?
Rima asked a question as well in the chat about who led up a lot of the efforts here, and I wanted to just jump in on that because I didn't respond to it in the chat. Here we had a variety of folks that help lead up some of the efforts. I think primarily it has been Spanish speakers and Latinos who are most plugged in with the communities, just from a representation trust standpoint. However, we've had a pretty multiracial leadership group that is very interested in seeing this work happen, and I think for any organization, that's pretty crucial. You have leadership, regardless of where they're at, feels like this is a priority for the organization. And that's happened here. And it's been very, very instrumental in ensuring things get done.
I want to add something. If you're planning on having more community engaged journalists in your communities, don't be afraid of experiment. Conecta Arizona was born just an experiment. And when I won the JSK Stanford Fellowship, I was like, oh my God, how did I make to Stanford with this Conecta Arizona experiment? And they offered me a senior year. So I'm doing the double fellowship this year, because instead of being an experiment, we grew to a news organization. And 2 days ago, actually, I was having a conversation with my mentor from Stanford, and I was telling her, like, I'm really proud of what we have achieved with Conecta Arizona, but I know that the Conecta Arizona is gonna die someday. I wish it's not soon, but we are here to provide information during our world health crisis. And this is the purpose of Conecta Arizona. We can repurpose it, but I don't want to get married to that, because I don't want my need to establish Conecta Arizona as a news organization doesn't reflect what the community actually needs. So your project can be just an experiment for 1 or 2 or 3 years, and then it will die and it will transform to another something different, because that's how we live. It's our diets. It's like some days we're in paleo, another days we're keto, and then it's low carb, and whatever you're doing is, and if it works, it's fine. But don't be afraid of experiment. But to experiment, you need to invest in the community, and it's not that expensive. For example, Conecta Arizona, we have WhatsApp group, we have Telegram, we have the newsletter, the radio show, and we're going to launch mini podcasts for WhatsApp in the next couple of months. And that's something that we're doing with just freelancers. And basically what we need and what we're using is a cell phone, and we pay the bill $80 per month, and that's it. And everything else is human resource. So invest in people, invest in the community, experiment. If it at the end it doesn't work out, you have the knowledge that you invested and you experimented, and you know that that's not the way to go, and you need to find another path.
I have a follow-up question, Maritza. When you talked about specifically serving a specific community, that especially for the Spanish speakers in Arizona, you chose to serve predominantly a Mexican community. Ernesto, has that gone into your thinking too, as you're more broadly doing Spanish language programming, on how to manage regional differences or cultural differences? Because clearly the Spanish speaking community is not one monolith.
I will say for us, this has been an iterative process. So we're still, to what I think Paola said a little bit earlier, still trying to learn some things, doing some work, but trying to make sure we're open to changing it. Our initial work out of our audience research has been, how can we begin to build some conversations around common experiences that are bicultural, that cross regardless of whether you're Salvadoreño or Mexican or whatever that may be. And that was the genesis of where the Ofrendas series began, and some of our showcases as well. I think as we begin to drill down a little bit more, we're starting to step out a little bit more with some very specific experiences like the Victor Aguilar event, talking about the Venezuelan experience. I believe that we're going to continue to do more and more of that. It's just going to be a matter of figuring out where are the biggest opportunities for us in terms of the size of the smaller communities that might go beyond the Mexican community. Here in the Bay Area, similar to Arizona, we do have a very big Mexican community, but we also have a lot of other communities that have made their homes here. And so we're trying to figure out how we begin to foster new conversations with those communities.
And I wanted to quickly add to that, that Que Pasa Midwest, we chose to focus on the Latinos in the Midwest. But how we approach that is that we kind of tell the stories of sometimes specific people, like a story from Venezuela, or a story from Mexico with the Mexican pulque. But we try to create the stories and at the same time tell our audience that these stories kind of transcend our borders and our own cultural differences and how we share them. And I think that's another way to kind of make you relate to your community or, your content.
Thank you.
All right. If there is no more questions, then we will go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again to Ernesto, Maritza, and Paola. I will be sending around a link to some of the things that were discussed, some of the presentations, and I'll also be sure to include everyone's contact information in case you'd like to get in touch with them for follow-up questions or anything. A reminder, our next training is going to be next week on Thursday, so keep an eye out for that information coming in Slack. And otherwise, have a great night, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you,
Gracias.
guys. Great job.
Bye.
Gracias.